great. But you will probably need to be like in front of the TV so the students can see. We already have one, two, three, four, five, 6 students in Zoom, which is great. Thank you guys for being here. Oh, wait, we don't want that. Yeah. We're gonna close the window. I mean, the doors. All right. Well, hopefully more students will show up, but feel free to have some snacks. Be sure.
I thought I was gonna be late, you know?
No, you're
Yeah.
okay.
No, you're on time and we're
No,
late.
it's just a lot of students are busy, but
Right.
we're happy that you have. Can you guys see us okay? And hear us too?
Let's go into that.
Yeah, if you can
Somebody undo your audio.
yeah,
so
or
you'll
like
hear
or
you.
type something and say that you can hear us. Oh yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. We're gonna go ahead and start. My name is Kostya. You might have received an email from me. That's probably why you know. Um,
And I'm Jane, and what
Yes.
we're gonna do, we're having some, of course, technical issues here. But we're just gonna go ahead and start the slide presentation. So for right now, you get to enjoy our faces, and you may not hear in a second. And we will introduce ourselves.
Yes. Okay. So hopefully you're able to see our screen. There you go.
Are you in slide presentation mode?
Yes, it's sharing. It says, can you guys see the slides?
Okay.
Yes, okay,
Thanks,
thank you.
Sarah.
Okay, well, so the title of our presentation is Verbal Communication Skills in the US and the Workplace. And we're going to be talking about a lot of cool stuff today.
We think it's cool.
We think it's cool, yeah. So I know some of you are teaching assistants, some of you are research assistants, some of you are neither, and we're hoping to make it applicable to all. So that's why we put the title as workplace or classroom. So even if you have never been or not planning to be an assistant of any kind of type, this is going to be helpful for when you work and how to communicate effectively in the workplace. So my name is Kostya. Like I said, this is Jane.
Hi, I'm Jane Price, and I work here at CTE. And I have taught at the University of Texas and here at the U in linguistics for the international students. So it's very fun for me to actually get to interact again and do something, you know, a little different from my usual daily job. And I wanted to go over the agenda of what we're going to do today. As an introduction, if you are thinking that this might be, you know, kind of a cultural thing about quirky Utah pronunciations and American idioms, no, this is going to be a lot more global. We'll have two parts in here. The first part is about your verbal message itself, so what you are saying. And part two is your delivery or how you actually go about saying your message. And of course, at the end, then the most important part usually is the Q&A, where you can ask your questions. So before we begin, because we're on Zoom and the vast majority of you in this are on Zoom, please, and we're very serious about this, we're not going to be monitoring the chat because then I get derailed and I can't remember what I'm about to say. So if you have a question while we're going through or a comment that you would like to make, we do want this to be interactive. So just go ahead and turn on your audio and say, I have a question, somehow get our attention and we can address that as we go.
If we have a small audience here, but we're still here, you're still here. If you have questions, feel free to interrupt us.
Okay, so as our little icebreaker here, what can I expect from this workshop? Not this sort of stuff. Hurricanes don't happen in Hurricane, Utah. Why do they pronounce it Hurricane? Nobody knows, but that is not the kind of nitty-gritty things we're going to be talking about. Or something like this. You can get a good meal at Ruth's Diner. So I'm not from Utah, and mill, oh, I think they mean meal, or something like the real deal instead of the real deal. Doesn't bother me anymore. It's fine. It's the way we pronounce things here. Maybe you have noticed this. We're not going to discuss idioms because discussing idioms opens a whole can of worms, and you can find all sorts of stuff on the internet on all the weird idioms. Instead, we're going to talk about these kind of global issues, and we're going to start out with formality.
Yes. Do you wanna?
Yeah, sure. So when you address people, when you first meet them, you first contact them, how exactly do you know the level of formality that would be expected? And this, of course, varies from culture to culture. And our suggestion would be to go formal until you're told otherwise. So, if you are a student in a course, you would address your professor as Professor so-and-so until they tell you otherwise, to call them just by their first name. Or if you're in a work situation, that would be the same kind of thing. Call them Mr. or Mrs. or Doctor or whatever until they ask you otherwise. Do you have anything else to say about that, Kostya?
I'm good. Good, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Kostya did want to talk about good afternoon. That's one of his things.
Yeah, and I don't remember if we mentioned this, but we both have an ESL background, so teaching, I think you did mention it, right? So
Yeah.
ESL, so in my professional career, this is like one of such a common mistake, is students want to be formal, right? Just like we said, and sometimes it's like they go overboard, they are overly formal. So like what I hear sometimes students used to come to my class and say, good afternoon. And I would actually say, well, because they probably think that good morning, good afternoon, and good evening are equally used, but it's actually not true. Like literally almost nobody uses good afternoon in America, like at all. Like whether you are in the workplace, like if you have a job or if you're a TA teaching students, right? I would suggest don't ever say good afternoon. Like unless you're teaching like, I don't know, unless you're giving like a lecture to like 100 people, or you're the president of the United States addressing the
UN.
the UN, yes. But normally people do say morning. They say good morning if you want.
That's what I say on the bus every day.
I would
Good morning.
Personally would never say good evening unless again it's formal, but good afternoon, it's like extremely formal. So yes, be formal, but like I would say, don't use good afternoon, like, because nobody does it.
Yeah. And I'd not actually thought about that before. And Kostya, yes.
I have a question. So like you mentioned that we should use professor or mister, like should we address them by their last name or their first name?
Last name.
Last name, okay.
Until they say, no, it's okay, just call me Jane.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
mhm.
And it's not rude, like if you're instructor, let's
That's
say
expected.
if you're teaching, or if you're not in this, if you're working in like I don't know, your boss's boss says, oh, please don't call me call me by my first name. It's okay to call them by their first name.
Mhm.
It's not gonna be rude. It's not gonna be like, yeah, totally okay.
And what is your name?
It's Sudanva.
Sudanva?
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay.
So like I'm actually doing like part-time RA. So,
Nice.
and so I refer to my professor as Professor
Right.
Warren or Professor Patin, which is his last name.
Mhm.
And up until now, he's just asked me to call him Warren, like that was one time. And then yeah, I just refer him using like all sorts of things. And he's also a doctor. So I just refer to him as doctor. So
Yeah,
That's fine.
yes.
So the question, if you didn't hear it on Zoom, is do you call them by their title and first name, or title and last name, and title and last name until you're asked to do otherwise?
yeah. Oh, and this super quick thing. So like, this is
Mm.
another thing that I notice a lot of, and again, this is like hopefully gonna help you. Hopefully you're not gonna be like, oh no, I've been making this mistake. So a common mistake with is, oh yes.
Oh, mine John. Mine madam.
Can we find the PowerPoint of recording?
Audio.
So we will post I think your
Meron.
phone is on and you don't know that you're being listened.
Yes, for which one?
But about the PowerPoints, and then we'll send the PowerPoints out after
Yes.
the
mhm,
recording is done.
Yeah. And hopefully the recording will turn out okay. Those are a great question. Thank you. So going back to this, so another common thing that I hear, not all the time, but students do make that, is when they overuse or they think that this is and I am are the same thing. So if you are introducing yourself for the first time, whether it's a job interview or whatever, right? You would say, I am so-and-so, or like, my name is so-and-so, but then after this, don't do this,
Mhm.
right? You should always, if you think that they might have forgotten your name, you can just say, oh, this is so-and-so. So this is to remind them who you are.
Mhm.
So the common mistake is that sometimes I get emails from the student that I've known for like 6 months, and they keep saying, I am so-and-so. I'm like, I know, we've already met, right? So instead say, this is.
Yeah,
'cause I
or
am.
if you're leaving like a phone message,
Yes,
you know,
uh-huh.
somebody that you would
Mhm.
just say, this is Jane, instead of saying I am Jane.
Yeah, so I am is like the first time, and then after that, always use this is.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, it's a little tricky.
How do I get this to go?
Go back or go?
Go forward.
Oh, okay.
There.
Now it should work.
And think about the level of directness in your own culture. If you, haven't just really overtly thought about it before, when you want somebody to do something, how direct are you with your choice of words? And what I wanted you to kind of think about in your own country, you can think about the geography, and the different parts of your country have some stereotypes about those people in that part are really polite, these people in this part are really direct. I'm sure that every country has that kind of concept. So here in the United States, if you don't already have stereotypes, I can tell you what the stereotypes are. In the East, we think of New York City, Boston, the kind of East Coast, New England area, as they are very direct and very fast, and they want to get to the point. And it's not about being polite. They want to move on and do their thing.
Efficient.
Efficient. I think of they talk fast. Those are the stereotypes. Versus the South, like Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, those areas we think of as being the English is much slower, much more polite and indirect. And I kind of, because that's sort of the area that I'm from, I kind of miss being called darling when you go into the coffee shop. What would you like, darling? That just is super polite, and they're like family members to you. And then in the West Coast is a lot more relaxed, but they don't call each other darling or
that'd be
honey,
weird. Mhm.
that's not part of it. So here in Utah, we're kind of in that neutral area of it's weird to hear somebody call you honey here, who's not part of your family. But we're not near as fast talking and get the job done as the East Coast. So our point here about the level of politeness and directness in Utah is pretty neutral. So let's give some examples of, instead of, if you want somebody to do something, either you're the boss or you're the TA, and to accomplish, to not just say something completely directly if you don't want to sound rude here in Utah. So Kostya could give you some examples here.
Like sometimes I hear like students don't actually, they're not trying to be rude, right? They're just like literally translating what comes to mind, and they say that in English, and it comes out rude because it's like, let's say if you want someone to do something, you're not gonna just say, close the door. Right? Or even if you say close the door, please, that still sounds weird, right? So typically, especially with, um, because I don't know, because we're here in Utah, you would expect something like, could you please, right?
Mhm,
Would you mind?
mhm,
Would it be like if you're asking, I don't know, if you're asking a professor to extend the deadline, you're not gonna say, Dr. So-and-so,
mhm,
extend the deadline, please. That would sound so weird, even though they might never tell you that that sounds weird.
mhm,
You would probably say, a better way to say that is to say, would it be possible to extend the
mhm,
deadline? Or
mhm,
could you please, would you be so kind as to do
mhm.
so that? But something like that.
We also wanted to talk about the concept of feedback, because whether you're in an academic or work situation, feedback is going to be, part of what you do every day. You are either giving the feedback because you're in a higher position of power, or you're going to be taking the feedback. And, it's a kind of a cultural question of what's appropriate and what is actually not appropriate, or it's inordinately harsh, or maybe even a personal attack. So my suggestion about that, if you are receiving feedback, especially if you are in, the lower position of power, you don't want to confront either the professor or your boss, but you are always welcome to ask for clarification or to ask for a specific reason. So if the person in power giving you feedback cannot give you an actual example of this is what you did and this is how to do it better, and this is specifically what I'm referring to, if they don't have that kind of case, then you are correct that the feedback is not appropriate and it's too harsh and it's too critical. And the same thing if you are giving feedback to somebody that either as the TA making comments on somebody's work, that you need to be able to actually back it up with what is it that the student did and how exactly can they do that better. So if you feel like you just need to take it and and never question, we don't want you to feel like that, if you are the person receiving the feedback. And you can think back to your grammar classes of learning passive voice and active voice. If you are giving feedback, that it's always more gentle and more polite to use passive voice. So say somebody is trying to, see, I got derailed. Oh, if somebody is making like a flyer for you at work, and here's the date of the Zoom meeting and the date was put in wrong, that you don't actually say to the person, you put the wrong date,
You
fix
messed up.
this. Yeah, that's very accusatory. So what you would write, it would be better to use passive voice. This was a typo, or this date was changed, something where you're using was and putting in the passive so it doesn't directly relate to that person's mistake.
And super quick, like, let's say you're working, right, and your supervisor says, this needs to be done by next week, right? So in a way, that is kind of a command. They're telling you what to do without they're not saying you need to do this. They're saying this needs to be done. So they're using passive voice to kind of be respectful and not say, well, I'm the boss, you're the employee, right? So at the same time, if somebody's using passive voice to give you things to do, you should probably do them, right? Especially if it's your supervisor.
Yeah.
That's the same. And again, if those who are in Zoom, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. Sometimes students unmute themselves but don't actually ask a question, then we'll probably mute them again. But if you do have a question, please feel free to either type them or just literally unmute yourself and interrupt us at
And
any
interrupt
point.
us.
Totally fine.
Speaking of interrupting, yeah, okay. So the next thing we wanted to talk about here is the really culturally tricky thing of humor and sarcasm, because humor does not always translate from culture to culture. But humor is a great icebreaker, and I would say, especially United States, we like humor, and I think we're more prolific in using humor in formal situations than a lot of other cultures might be. So when we started this off, we were going to be really funny, but then of course we couldn't get the technology to work, so we weren't as funny as we normally are. But it helps with approachability, right?
Yes.
And makes your audience feel a little more comfortable if they can have some kind of laugh at the beginning. And by approachability, I mean that, of course, the more formal your language is, the more distance you are making between yourself and your audience. And especially in a work situation, you want to feel like you're a team, and approachable, meaning that there's somebody that you can relate to. So you want to kind of mentally shrink that distance between you and your audience. And so if you haven't really just overtly thought about this also, does your culture expect humor from the person in power? Or if they're being humorous, do you feel like they're not being professional? So that's the question. You want to be somewhere kind of in the middle here in Utah. of not being overly professional
Mhm.
so that you are distancing yourself from your audience, but at the same time, maybe you don't want to be their best friend.
Yes. Yeah,
So don't be overly serious.
yeah, so, and super quick, because we mentioned the word sarcasm, because Americans are, they like to, since we're talking about communication, whether that's the classroom or the workplace, like if you don't say, let's say if you, I don't know, teach a class and no one says a single joke, yes, it's professional, but like that would be so unusual because like it's almost part of the culture to have to be a little bit, joke every now and then. But sarcasm is also used, right? So super quick, does anybody know what sarcasm is? Or maybe give me an example. Maybe you can give me an example, or maybe those of you who are in Zoom, how would you explain what sarcasm is? Or maybe like just so to make sure we're all on the same page. What is sarcasm?
Nobody's heard of sarcasm?
I'm sure maybe they're typing.
Har, har, har. That was sarcasm. Yeah, I'm making a joke
Oh,
here.
yeah. There's a student. Oh, never mind. I was gonna say something.
Like you say something super weird, but it's meant to be funny,
Yeah.
or something rude, which is meant to be funny.
Yeah, it's meant to be funny. Usually I think of it's the opposite of what you mean.
Uh-huh.
Oh, well, that's just great. So of course, that means it's not great.
Kind of like,
That's American humor, especially.
like when
and British humor.
technology wasn't working, you're like, oh, great, right?
Yeah,
That,
yeah,
that technology is
Mm.
hates us, right? But like, and that's like the, even if it's a good way to, it's a really good icebreaker. Or it doesn't have to be an icebreaker, even if you have taught a lot, or if you have been working in the same place, it's kind of part of the culture. But also make sure that, you have to be kind of confident about your language and
Yeah.
about like being exposed to like cultural references to make a joke, because if
Mhm.
you make a joke and it doesn't land, like nobody understands what you're joking about, then it's gonna be a little bit awkward. So
Yeah.
this one is kind of, you have to be at a certain level where you're so comfortable with your knowledge of English, but also your knowledge of,
The cultural
Mhm.
implications.
then it's gonna work. But because if you don't, then no one's gonna be like, everyone's gonna be like, what are they talking about?
So that's our final point here, right? When in doubt, just don't try to land the joke, as Kostya said. Oh, we need a
A little
clicker.
tricky to navigate so many windows at the same time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to bring this one
Yeah.
up about missed cultural references. So when you're in another country, I mean, it's just inevitable throughout the day. People will make some comment about, a pop star or a TV show or something in the news or something, and you're just not going to get the reference. And you can just let that go, and who cares? It doesn't matter. You can investigate it later. But if it is something that is actually going to affect your participation, then I really want you to feel free to say, can somebody explain this to me? I don't know what this reference is. So I thought of the example, if you're in like maybe a work meeting and you're trying to, okay, we really need to problem solve to head off or to stop some problem before it happens. And think about, okay, so like the Challenger disaster, how could that have been prevented? If you don't know what the Challenger disaster is, how are you going to participate in this conversation? And you weren't here in 1986 when the space shuttle blew up. And anybody my age would say, "Oh my gosh, I remember we were watching that on TV because there was an educator who was going to be the first person in space, and so we're all watching it, and the thing blows up." So that actually gives us a visceral response of, "Oh, we don't want something like that." But if you weren't here or you're less than 50 years old, then you need to feel free to ask somebody on the team, hey, okay, stop. I don't know what this reference is. Can you give me some background? And nobody's going to say your English is terrible or what's the matter with you. They're going to go, hey, you weren't here or you're, not young enough to know this. So we're trying to encourage you that if the cultural reference is going to prevent you from being successful in whatever collaboration you're doing, then that's on you to just ask for clarification, and nobody's going to think less of you. Ah, the
So-
Americans. Oh, don't you love AI generated pictures?
Right.
This is the loud American stereotype, and we're in part 2 here is the actual verbal delivery. And this first one is about volume. And different cultures have different levels of volume that is acceptable, particularly, male and female might have volume differences. And in the United States, we're just all loud. So I brought this up because sometimes I get the feeling that if English is not your native language and somebody asks you to repeat something, that your immediate response is to think there's something wrong with my English, or I didn't use the right vocabulary, or my grammar's messed up. And it may just be that you're not loud enough, they didn't hear you. So if somebody asks you to repeat something, I would use the exact same words that you just said and not try to change your grammar or vocabulary, because then your listener has to start again and rethink what they think you're saying. So just say the same thing exactly with the same words, but just a little bit louder and maybe a little bit slower, and see if that fixes it.
Yeah, and I'm probably gonna say the same thing. So like, again, if somebody says, sorry, could you say that one more time? Say the exact same thing.
Mhm.
Like literally, like sometimes you can be, I don't know, traveling to another country and you can spot two Americans on the train, right? Because they're so loud. And that's because Americans are loud when they speak, but they also kind of expect the same volume.
Mhm.
So there are, and I've had so many students from other cultures where in general, they just don't talk as loud in their country.
Mhm.
So they kind of have to force themselves to speak a little bit louder. But don't automatically assume, oh, it's my grammar. Oh,
Yeah.
it's my accent. Oh, I use, it's my vocabulary. It's
Mhm.
literally, you just have to say it louder.
Mhm.
Unless they ask you like multiple times, then maybe.
Yeah, so we've just answered that.
Oh, yeah.
If you are asked what, and again, to talk about the polite thing, Coach is so much more polite than I am. I'd probably just say what, but he,
Because you're from the South. I'm just kidding. No, but like this is true. Like, I mean, if you are with your friends and then you, I don't know, you're like in that picture, right? You're at a bar or something getting drinks, and then someone like said something, you're like, what? That's okay, right? You can say, wait, what? That's fine. But typically, if you are in the workplace or in the classroom, whether
Mhm.
you're teaching or whether you're a TA, it's again that polite vocabulary. It's better to say, oh, could you please repeat that? Or would you mind saying that one more time?
Mhm.
Instead of saying what? Because people
Yeah.
would be like, ooh, that's rude.
You
They'll
always
think
think
it.
about being rude. I don't
They
know.
won't say that, but they will think that.
Next, we wanted to talk about pausing during the conversation itself. So, and Coach had especially thought about this one. Do moments of silence in your culture equate with awkwardness? I'll let you talk
Oh,
about what
thank
you were
you.
thinking. Yeah, go
Thank
ahead.
you. No, in a lot of cultures, when it's quiet, it's not necessarily awkward, just like people are processing the information. But Americans, again, I was actually, in case you guys, you probably have figured out, but I have a very non-American name. I'm actually originally from Ukraine, which is in Eastern Europe. People here in America, so no offense to Jane, she's American.
I'm offended. I haven't even heard what you're gonna say.
Oh, I was gonna say like how Americans are so uncomfortable with like long pauses. Like if you're, I don't know, if you're in a work meeting, like somebody has to say something, otherwise it's just gonna be so awkward. Or like think about like your class, right? Maybe not necessarily before class, but like during class, when no one is saying anything, it's like, oh no.
Everybody gets out their
So like
phone.
if you are a TA, if you're teaching a class, right, and then no one's is with the classroom, it's a little bit different because like if you're asking a question and it's a hard question, it's okay because maybe your students are thinking. But in general, just so you know, typically someone will say something I don't know, if somebody asks you a question and you're like, right, that would be like so uncomfortable. So that's why
Awkward.
Americans would, they'd be like, what's happening? Why is the person not talking? Like, why?
Mhm.
So it's better to kind of feel that. I looked it up, it was like 1.7 seconds is like the average. And after that, if no one is talking for 2 seconds, 1, 2, right, it gets awkward.
Uh-huh. So for example, right, when we just recently said, do you have a definition of sarcasm? If I were
yeah.
in an actual classroom with 30 students, I would force myself to give some actual time
Mhm.
for somebody to answer. In a Zoom call, it's kind of weird, we just
It's
sort of
always
blast
weird.
on through. Yeah, because it gets awkward really fast in Zoom. But if you are, especially if you are a TA and you're working with a group of students, if you ask a question, to really make yourself, if it's not automatic and comfortable for you, to maybe count to 5 or something in your head, because eventually you're really, really quiet students who don't want to jump in, and they just let the other guy who always does all the talking anyway, he's going to say something, so it's fine. But maybe your introverts or your quiet students really have something to contribute, but they're not going to jump in fast and say it. So if you give them enough time, they will participate more. That's my suggestion of, handling especially a group of students in particular, I would think. Your delivery, conversation rules, and
Oh, yeah,
because I interrupt him all the time. See,
that's not true. So
I just did.
So in the US, again, it doesn't matter if you're in the classroom or in a workplace. So like I said, I taught so many different students from so many different cultures, and they would literally interrupt me in the middle of the conversation without me finishing my thought. I would get so, and in some cultures, it's normal to speak, to talk over someone and maybe even like talk louder, regardless of the, power structure, right? So like essentially, it's okay for some cultures to like to speak louder than the teacher, right? Or than your boss. But anyway, so in the US, it's kind of assumed that the person needs to finish their thought before you start, you take turns, right?
Mhm.
Again, don't interrupt as much as possible. I'm not saying that, we're not saying that no one, you'll probably just go outside this room and hear how Americans interrupt each other. But in general, interrupting is probably not a good idea, right? And then, but do you want to talk about the affirmation? That's a good one.
Well, yeah, by affirmation, I mean like in Korean, you would say "ne" a lot, just to show the person that you're following them. Or in English, I do a lot of
Right.
So you're not actually interrupting or talking over, but you're definitely affirming that you're still engaged and you're still listening. And so this is kind of what we're addressing here of, if you are interrupting somebody, you're showing that you have more power than they do, which gets annoying to the person without the power here, or that you're trying to control things. But it can also just be those
Right.
sort of is affirmation that you are engaged with your partner that you're speaking with, and showing that you're following what they're saying. So those are good.
But also if you're not, just to say, right, if you're not doing that, let's say if she's talking, right, and I'm not just like,
That's weird.
right, it's like it's almost kind of like I don't know, maybe subconsciously, Jane is expecting me to say, right, so I am listening. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, like what are the different types of affirmation that you can use?
You probably naturally do them in your own language,
Mhm.
and you probably naturally do them in English, but just like my example of, I just do a lot of
You can say the word right, right, oh, definitely, right, and it's okay to like literally say that at the same time, or talking over her, but that's not really interrupting her, that's more like affirming that I'm like, and not necessarily that I'm agreeing with her, because I hardly ever agree with Jane, just kidding, but it's more like, it's like I'm listening, right, so that's, so maybe like when she says something, I'm like, oh, I disagree, but I'm just like, right, I'm just listening. I'm not necessarily agreeing with
And-
her.
And a lot of this, our next presentation in March that Kostya will talk about is nonverbal. So really a whole lot of that affirmation stuff is wrapped up with your nonverbal, just nodding your head that you're following.
Yeah, and super quick, I was gonna mention being from, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm from Ukraine, Eastern Europe. And people in Eastern Europe, so like apparently when I came here, I didn't know that was a stereotype, but stereotypically, people in Eastern Europe, so like Poland, a lot of other countries are perceived as grumpy or too direct or too like frank or too, I don't know, maybe even
Too serious?
too serious, right?
Yeah.
Too rude. People are like, but like, look at your faces on the metro. You're like, no one ever smiles in Eastern Europe. I'm like, what? Why would I? But like, so honestly, when I came here, I forced myself to be extra polite, right? So that people, like, for example, if Jane was like, I don't know, she was having a bad day, she was being, I don't know, kind of grumpy, right? People would be like, oh, she's just having she's a grumpy person, but not because she's American, you know what I mean? But if I did the same thing, I would be perceived as like, ugh, typical, Eastern European, always grumpy, always like moody. So, and sometimes, you might just so you guys are aware, that you might also be, when you are here in the US, you might be dealing with these stereotypes where people might think, oh, you are from this country, you are rude, or you are grumpy, or you are moody, right? Or something else. So sometimes you kind of have to be like extra polite so
Yeah.
that it's not something I like, but it's just something I need to be aware of because yeah.
So the word I would use for that is overcompensating.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Overcompensating. And when I made jokes before about how Kostya really is so polite, he really is. I'm much more direct than he is. But again, I can do that because I have the beauty, what's the word I want? I'm a native speaker, so I can be forgiven for those kind of things even more than he can.
Yes.
Something to think. Oh, you were gonna say, sorry, you were saying, just as a, you put that in because you're so polite and I would.
Oh, I don't actually, this is, like, if you didn't hear if
All right.
what something said, instead of saying like, again, going back to like what, don't say what, right? She could say what, because she's American. If I said what, I would be considered rude, but like, one way a good way to say, like, instead of saying repeat please, like if you said repeat please, people would be like, what? Like, no one says repeat please, right? That's just so weird. You would say, wait, sorry, what were you saying? Or like,
Yeah.
sorry, you were saying, and then
Yeah,
you would
yeah.
continue that, right? That's just kind of like what Americans are expecting from you. So it just kind of the way it is.
Yeah. And then I wanted to talk about this. I taught pronunciation forever. And I want to emphasize that fluency does not equal speed. So a lot of my students would come into my pronunciation class with the goal of being able to speak faster so that they sound like they are masters of English. But lots of times misunderstandings come when you're talking to a native speaker because you're just talking so fast, they can't follow what you're saying. And a lot of languages are just kind of built fast. Like when I listen to Spanish, and particularly, from certain countries, that man, they can really cram a lot of
Yep.
syllables into 2 seconds. But if you listen to people who are just perceived as really well spoken, like I think of Barack Obama, he just is so easy to listen to, and he does not talk fast. So sometimes one of the easiest things you can do in your delivery to help your listener is just to slow down. It gives them more time to process what you're saying. It gives you more time to process what you're about to say. And we are not judging you on your speed. We are just judging your content on how easy it is for us to understand.
And can I just make a quick
Yeah,
quick
sure.
comment?
Yeah.
So like, when you say something and somebody didn't understand you, it's awkward for you because you're not understood, but it's also awkward for them sometimes because they're like, oh, I have to like, imagine that you are a teaching assistant or a research assistant or something else, right? it's, when you say something quickly, they didn't understand you. Sometimes they're not gonna ask you because they're being too polite. They're worried about hurting your feelings as a non-native speaker. So they're not gonna ask you to repeat anything. So you're not gonna be understood. They're not gonna ask you to repeat, and no one's gonna, nothing is gonna be accomplished, right? So
Mhm.
it's okay to just slow down,
Mhm.
as long as they understand.
The goal is to be understood, and that's the whole goal. We do have one final tip here that Kostya brought up. Remember that I may be a native speaker of English, but that does not mean that I'm a Native American.
Mhm.
So the Utes are Native Americans. It's not referring to their language. They are indigenous people here. It's a tribal term.
Right, so this is, again, going back to the common mistakes that students make, like, sometimes they say, because they're like, maybe not confident in their English, they say, oh, sorry, like, maybe instead of saying, I'm not from here, they're gonna say, they want to say, I'm not a native speaker,
Mhm.
but they say, I'm not a Native American. And
We
native
knew
speaker and
that.
Native American, they could be, the same thing, of course, but oftentimes those are two separate things, right?
Mhm.
Like, Jane is not Native American. I'm not Native American. She's a native speaker. I'm not a native speaker. So,
Although he sounds like one.
oh, you're too kind. But yeah, so be careful with that. I would suggest avoid Native American as much as possible, so that because there's so many like little things, very
Nuances.
nuances. Yeah, so you have to be
Mhm.
very, very careful. So if you are trying to say that, I don't know, or like, oh, or like if your roommate is from Utah, I hear that all the time. They're like, my roommate is from Utah. They are Native American, which could be possible, but most likely that's not what they mean.
Yeah.
So just say native speaker instead of Native Americans, because
Yeah.
you can get,
Get
yeah,
yourself in trouble.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's it for the presentation. At this point, you are welcome to put something in the chat or just go ahead and unmute yourselves if you have questions to actually ask us. And then we will wrap up pretty soon and give you some info on our next workshop.
Did you have any? Yeah.
Yeah, I have one question regarding the speed. Like, I've noticed that people from places like New Hampshire and Connecticut, New York, they speak super fast.
Uh-huh.
And there are times where I don't understand what they're saying. So would it be okay for me to ask them to repeat again?
Sure.
Absolutely.
So if you didn't hear the question, you know, my stereotype about the East Coast, those speakers are really fast. So the question is it okay for me to ask them to speak slower? And of course. And I think that's that's all there is to really say about that. But you know, just phrase it politely and say, sorry, could you repeat that a little bit slower? And that would be totally acceptable.
My very first city, or very first time being exposed to the US was Atlanta, Georgia. And I remember I had a layover, like an 8-hour layover in Atlanta at the airport. So I was like, I'm gonna take the metro, and I did. And I was trying to talk to like a worker there, and she said something, obviously in English, because she's a native speaker. And I was like, I have no idea what she just said. So I asked, sorry, could you say that one more time? And she said the exact same thing, and I still didn't understand. And I asked her, I was like, I'm sorry, could you say it slower? She said the same thing slower, and I couldn't understand anything. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna take the metro without whatever she said. So it's totally okay to, accents are, that's a whole other subject, but like, yeah, accents are hard. I don't have a lot of people who are from New Hampshire. I'm sure it's very interesting, but it's totally okay
It's that same.
to ask to repeat something. But
Any other questions
let's see.
for anybody left here?
Oh, very helpful. We're glad it's helpful. We do have one more slide.
Mhm.
Do you want to maybe talk about that?
You just, if you don't know what CTE does, we're in the faculty center, but we're not just for the professors. We also help all the teaching assistants. So we can come in and observe a class. If you have questions about how am I doing with my teaching, or you know, what should I do in these situations as a TA, then that's part of our job is to help you out. And we have a lot of workshops that are open for all of the teaching assistants, not just the international TAs.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this was part one. We're actually gonna do a part two at the end of March. I think it's March 26th. We're
Mhm.
gonna be talking about, so communication in the classroom or workplace, but nonverbal.
Mhm.
So like, can you think of an example? So like, we'll talk about like how Americans don't usually, it's one of the most like touch deprived cultures in the US, right? So we typically like, you don't touch a person like that. It's just, they're just like not used to that. Or like how comfortable they are in terms of like the physical space.
Now, don't give away the whole presentation. What are we gonna do?
Well, this is like
The
previously,
teaser.
it's more like, yeah, it's like, it's a next time on the show, right? But we're gonna be talking about stuff like that, where sometimes, I mean, I've had examples where a student would be so close to me, and I'm like, what is happening? Why are they so close to me? But, and so we'll be talking about things like that, where
Yeah.
you don't mean to be awkward, but just is perceived as awkward
Yeah.
because, anyway, so it's gonna be a lot of nonverbal stuff.
All right, that's all. Thanks for joining. And if you have registered, we'll go ahead and send you the PowerPoint and the recording of this. And thanks for
I
participating.
mean, we do have snacks, but you're not here.
Hey, don't tell them that.
But
We'll
maybe,
feed 'em
maybe
in.
next time when you guys are here, we have some snackies. So anyway, things have a good, have a good rest of the day. Bye, everyone. All right.